Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Today on the program, challenges ahead for the peace process.
Wala akong problema, so we continue with the war. And we have been there for 50 years. Ano ba naman ang dagdagan natin ng 30 years?
The military wants to terminate the peace talks.
We've been talking to them for the longest time and hindi naman nagpo-progreso. They're not actually after peace.
While communist groups accuse the president of spoiling ongoing negotiations.
And I can't, for the life of me, understand why the peace talks have to be suspended or recessed just so you could consult the people.
Also, is there an alliance between the CPP-NPA and church leaders to oust the president?
And historically, it has happened in the past. No, we have had priests actually fighting side by side with the NPA.
National Democratic Front of the Philippines consultant Rey Casambre joins us live. And later, this father takes breastfeeding to a whole new level. That's for today's In Focus. Thank you for joining us. Sitting in for Pinky Web, I'm Mai Rodriguez. Malacanang reveals that the communist group and some church leaders are joining forces to oust President Rodrigo Duterte. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque explains that some religious leaders still don't accept the fact that Mr. Duterte won the 2016 elections. Also, we get to know the status of peace negotiations now that Communist Party of the Philippines founder Jose Maria Sison says that only a miracle can save the peace talks, while the military wants to end the negotiations with the Reds. Let's go straight to the source of the story. Philippine Peace Center Executive Director and National Democratic Front of the Philippines Peace Consultant Rey Casambre is with us. Thank you for joining us on The Source, sir.
Thank you, Mai, for inviting me here.
Okay, first of all, what is exactly the status now of the peace talks? Is it suspended? Is it on hold? And how would you describe the situation now, especially with the strong statements that were issued by Secretary Delfin Lorenzana?
Well, exactly, nothing is exact. Everything is in limbo. The official situation is that it is only postponed. The government said so, and the NDF accepted this explanation for the postponement. But we are getting mixed, contradictory, and widely divergent statements from government. So, which one is true?
But also the statement by Joma Sison that only a miracle can save the peace talks, and it may happen, but not under the Duterte administration. What do you make of that?
If you read the entire statements, this has been a series of statements coming from Professor Sison. The statement that only a miracle can save it, or that there is no need to call for termination because the government has terminated it, all of these are projections based on the situation that the talks had been suspended despite, or postponed, despite the fact that for 4 months, the government panel and the NDF panel had been working out very religiously a way of resuming the formal negotiations, which we had believed all the while was under the marching orders of the president himself.
Well, when was the last time you met with the NDFP members and consultants?
Well, I was with the back channel, the 4th round of the back channel talks, June 6 to 10. And on the 11th, we had an assessment. The NDF panel had an assessment, and the general assessment was that it was successful. The back channel talks had been very successful at this point. And it only required just one more round of back channel talks. This was supposed to have been June 16 to 20, to just finalize, fine-tuning na lang, before the stand-down would be announced on the 21st, and the stand-down of forces. And 1 week later, on the 28th, would be the resumption of the formal talks.
Okay, but given that after what has happened, that just a week before the resumption of the peace talks, President Duterte and the government panel said it's suspended for now. Postponed for now. On what grounds or conditions do you think a resumption of peace talks can happen? I understand you yourself are hopeful.
Well, as a peace advocate, I am always hopeful. But as a consultant of the panel and having been in the negotiations for the past 25 years, I would say I am guardedly optimistic. Well, the optimism comes from the fact that this is not the first time this has happened. It has been worse in some ways because at one point under the Estrada administration, it was completely terminated. Now it has been terminated in quotation marks because it was not really officially or technically terminated. So there is a chance that it would resume. However, there are also certain factors now which were absent before. And that is, for one thing, you have now the Department of National Defense being more vocal with its opposition. In the past administrations, you did not have that. You did not have such an open difference in position between the Department of National Defense and maybe some other sections of the government, maybe the economic managers, although they're just silent about this, and the government panel and the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. For example, the statements on, even the President's statements, that he wants to talk with Professor Season himself. Well, that runs counter to the DND's position that no more talks. On the other hand, the President's position that the talks should be held here in the Philippines runs counter to the position of the peace panel, the government peace panel, because the government peace panel knows that there's a solemn agreement, and that has been observed all these years, that the talks have to be held in a foreign neutral venue. It would be impossible, no? Maybe part of the miracle Professor Season is referring to is that if President Duterte, by some miracle, would change his mind and say, okay, we'll just have the talks in a foreign venue. Okay,
but let me ask you, who do you listen to? Secretary Lorenzana or President Duterte?
If you mean the NDF, the NDF technically and officially has to recognize the President. Secretary Lorenzana is just an alter ego of the President, or is supposed to be the alter ego of the President. So, having said that, well, the NDF has no choice but to accept the President's statements as the government position. So all the other discordant voices are unfortunate. You would say they are spoilers. They are there, but it's something that the peace negotiations has to live with.
But given there have been strong statements issued by CPP founder Joma Sison, what exactly is Mr. Season's role as chief consultant of the NDFP, and who really is making the decisions?
First, his role as chief political consultant, of course that's the title, but there's more to it than that. Professor Season laid down the principles, you would say the general line, the framework for the NDF's participation in the peace negotiations. Everything that has happened since 1992, you can explain from the articles of Professor Season he wrote in 1990, 1991. This was after the failed peace negotiations under the Aquino administration, the first Aquino administration. So all of those principles and you would say general line, strategy and tactics, some might say, have been borne out to be valid and correct. So, well, Professor Season has that clear grasp of how the negotiations should run.
What is his actual role now in the negotiations?
Well, he is the chief political consultant, so he's not a member of the panel, but the panel listens to him. Who makes the decisions? The decisions are made ultimately by the NDF leadership here in the Philippines, because the principal of the NDF panel is not Professor Sison. It's the NDF leadership here in the Philippines.
Okay, and let's talk about the president immediately reacting that he's ready to go to war for another 50 years. What do
Well,
you
he
make
cut that down to 30 some days ago.
your
No,
reactions?
you have to, well, since the peace talks under this administration began, you can see that there's a lot of heated statements from both sides, but there's a lot of cooling down too. So you take it at that. We cannot take as final the statements, especially the ones said in anger or just spontaneous.
Speaking about that statement, let's listen to what the president said.
Di, mas mabuti. Kung sa mga negotiate, ano ito, negosyo? If they are not willing to talk to me, that's fine. Wala akong problema, so we continue with the war. And we have been there for 50 years. Ano ba naman ang dagdagan natin ng 30 years? So, sige. So, basta alam ng Pilipino na gano'n ang nangyayari.
So the NDFP described the president as the biggest spoiler of the peace talks. Do you stand by that statement?
Not really, no. My view is that it's not the president himself who is the biggest spoiler, although of course, because the buck stops with him, some of the worst statements and the worst decisions which he would state or he would support would be considered as big spoilers. But the other side of the coin is that under his administration, the peace negotiations also made unprecedented advances. You have to look at the whole picture. Saying he's the biggest spoiler is just part of it.
Okay, you said there are many advances under President Duterte's administration, but there are many voices in this peace talks. Let's talk about what Senator Ping Lacson said in a radio interview. He said it's better to remove Joma Sison in the picture because he has no more control on the group. Do you think this is an option?
Well, the premise is not really completely valid, saying that Professor Sison has no control. Yes, technically, officially, he has no control over the NDF because it is the NDF leadership here in the Philippines professors who has that control. Professor Sison himself has repeatedly said that nobody in the negotiating panel or nobody in the Netherlands controls the movement, the revolutionary movement here in the Philippines. Actually, it was the NDF leadership who gave the NDF panel the mandate to negotiate. So I don't really see the logic and the validity of Senator Lacson's statement. I think it was just wishful thinking.
Okay, there are many more issues to talk about. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Still to come, is there an ongoing move to oust the president by the CPP-NPA and some church leaders? NDFP peace consultant Rey Casambre will still be with us after the break. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, NDFP Peace Panel Consultant Rey Casambre. Thank you again, sir, for joining us. We were talking about what Senator Ping Lacson was suggesting earlier, and also he mentioned about localized peace talks in the regions. How would this happen, and do you think this is another option?
Well, this idea of localized peace talks has long been discredited and discarded. You cannot resolve problems which are national in nature and scope through local negotiations. What you could have, and what we have been having for the longest time, are local consultations. You have to ask the people what they think. You have to inform them of what the negotiations are tackling, what are the issues that are being resolved. This can and should be done on the local level as well as so up to the national, even international level. But peace negotiations on the local level will not work.
But are there anyone open to it, like regional leaders of the CPP-NPA? Are they open to localized talks?
None that I know. None that I know.
Let's talk about also the young guerrillas now. There are stories from Mindanao that some units of the NPA, now being led by younger commanders, are ignoring the old-timer veterans who lead in the regional committees. Your comment?
That's also one of the balitang barbero. Those are the tales being spread by people in government and people who do not want the peace talks to succeed, and they are pointing to the so-called disconnect between the leadership of the movement and even the negotiating panel and the forces on the ground. But if you look at throughout the 25 years or 26 years that the talks have been going on, there has been consistently no disunity, no disconnect between the forces on the ground and the leadership, which is here in the Philippines. The older ones, you might say, but that's not even true, because the leadership is, as far as the statements of the Communist Party and the NDF are state in their websites, there's a combination of old, middle, and young in all levels of leadership.
Okay, a statement from presidential spokesperson Harry Roque. He said that the offer of the president to Joma Sison to come home is still in effect. Let's listen to what Roque said in his interview here in the program.
The president has not revoked his offer. Come home, let's talk peace. I guarantee your personal security. I will provide for the daily needs of the entire CPP-NPA, provided you stop collecting revolutionary taxes. If nothing happens with the peace talks, I will personally bring you to the airport so that you can leave the Philippines. But if nothing happens with the talks, do not come back to the Philippines. It's an offer that he has not revoked. It is Joma Sison who has turned his back on the peace talks.
Okay, do you think Joma Sison will accept this offer or not anymore?
At this point? At this point, it's rather remote. But if the talks had continued last June 28, and if the talks had progressed after June 28 to the discussion and agreements on agrarian reform and rural development, national industrialization, and then the coordinated unilateral ceasefire, plus the amnesty proclamation, which was supposed to have been signed during the formal talks, if that is submitted to Congress and acted on by Congress, then I think in the discussions where Professor Sison said, yes, I'm willing, and in fact I welcome the invitation, but he said that this should be subject to the completion of certain political, legal, security, and other technical requirements.
Okay, let's talk about what the armed forces or military leadership is saying. Is there really an oust Duterte movement launched last year?
According to him, according to Secretary Lorenzana, there was a May 17, 2017 decision. I'm not aware of it, and when I read his statement, I searched the websites. Usually the Communist Party makes these announcements anyway. I did not find any document supporting that statement or allegation.
The military said this was launched, or this was talked about in the People's Congress.
The Party Congress.
The Party Congress.
Well, to begin with, I don't think that the Communist Party has any illusion that it can oust any president by itself, on its own. You read the party statements, they keep saying that any move to oust the president has to be a mass movement supported by a broad range of middle forces and supported by big business and supported by a section of the military. You read that every time from articles by the party on the question of ousting a president.
So you're saying the AFP's allegations are not backed up by evidence?
Yes, as far as I know.
Okay, let's talk about the accusations that the CPP-NPA and the church are working on an alleged destabilization plot against the Duterte administration.
Again, I cannot imagine the church leaders having sessions with the Communist Party leaders. Can you?
But, well, a statement right now, earlier, just today, a Catholic bishop dared the palace to name these people behind the alleged destabilization attempt or plot. Do you support this statement by the church leaders?
Yes, that's a good idea. Anyway, we are into public consultations, and so we lay down all cards that we have. I think the NDF has been doing that from the beginning. So even this question of ouster, you can read from the statements what the NDF's view of the ouster is. Professor Season himself, in making the statement that it might be easier to join, not for the NDF to launch it itself, but to join the ouster movement if, and there's the big if the present government continues with its policies, the economic policies, the foreign policy, which still are anti-people and anti-national, then the forecast or the projection of Professor Season is that this would lead, or this would push several sections, large sections of the population to join or to create that ouster movement. It's not something that any one organization or two organizations, no matter how big they are, can undertake.
Okay, final question. Can you pinpoint the main problem now, the hindrance to the peace talks, and what can move it forward?
Well, the main hindrance to the peace talks is resistance to the reforms that would address the roots of the armed conflict. And in some
resistance
from the military and from those sections of the population, small sections but very powerful ones, that do not want changes in the economic policies, that they do not want land reform, they do not want national industrialization, they do not want, say, giving the workers the right to a regular jobs. You're seeing this now. From the beginning, there was the promise to end contractualization, but even now it is a big problem.
Okay, final words. Are you still hopeful for the peace talks under President Duterte?
Well, yes, because you still have 4 years, and as we've seen how the president can change his mind from being very strongly opposed to the peace talks and threatening war and threatening martial law, sometimes implementing a little of it, but he also changes his mind and says, okay, let's talk, okay, let's see what reforms you are talking about, and so on.
Okay, we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for coming over. National Democratic Front Peace Consultant Rey Casambre. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Coming up, can a father also do breastfeeding? Well, this man proved that he can. That's for today's In Focus.